Okay, part 2 of chapter 6. We're ready for the temperate deciduous forest. As we're looking at the climatogram here, notice that fairly even amounts of precipitation, 12 centimeters being the highest total, and that is in March. So relatively heavy spring rains, but as you look at it, fairly even across the board. A little dry in October. And then if we look at temperatures staying on average above 0 degrees Celsius, so that'd be 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So on average staying above those temperatures. However, in nighttime it does get down below freezing in these areas in the winter. So this is an area that has seasons and gets fairly warm. This is up to 28 degrees, which is around 85 for summer months. So again, seasons: hot summers, cold winters, moderate precipitation in between 30 and 50 a year. Now remember, we are part of the temperate deciduous in Florida. However, we get around 65 inches of rain annually. But there again, we're on the southern cusp of that. Variety of hardwood trees. These are oaks, maple, hickory. These trees are great for hardwood floors, tables, furniture in general. Building houses, paper, you usually have pine trees, and pine trees can be integrated into a temperate deciduous forest, but most of the trees will be like this. Because there are a lot of trees, you will have a lot of leaf litter. These trees lose their leaves in the fall, and then all winter long they're dormant. So during the very, very cold months, there's no photosynthesis taking place, and these leaves just lay on the ground. Now also, during the winter time, there's very, very little, if any, decomposition going on. So really, decomposition takes place at a very rapid rate during the summertime because it is warm, but then you have 6 months where decomposition slowed down, so you have a lot of leaf litter. However, that leaf litter, there's a lot of organic matter there, so the ground is very, very fertile. And some of the best farm ground in the world has been converted from temperate deciduous forest. And that would be our Midwestern states. So where it says commonly converted to agriculture, that is absolutely true. Oops. Sorry, I'm going back. I also want to talk a little bit about the animals. You will either have animals that will hibernate in winter, animals that one of their adaptations is they store food for winter time, or they also get heavy, thick coats during the winter. So hibernation, thick coats, and storage of food so that they can maintain themselves throughout the winter. The next one, this is the grassland. Now I want you to look at the grassland because the temperature variation is much, much the same as temperate deciduous forest. So temperate grasslands, the same temperatures, but differing amounts of precipitation. As you can see here, March being one of the drier months, where it was the wettest month in the temperate deciduous forest, and then the wettest month going up to wettest couple of months, May and June, going up to 12 centimeters. So, but quite a bit less precipitation here. And we talked about the windward-leeward rain shadow effect. So, and we see that with the Great Plains, and this is where we're talking about. We're talking about those plains in Kansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. So hot summers, cold winters, moderate precipitation. And let me get out of your way so you can write the notes. Taller, short prairie grass. And this is also heavily converted to agriculture. Most of the agriculture in these areas is going to be wheat mainly. There's some corn, but corn takes a lot of water, so it has to be irrigated if it's in this area. And much of the wheat in these areas will be irrigated as well. But it's also pasture land, and the soil is also nutrient rich. Not as fertile per se as the temperate deciduous, but just a hair below the fertility level of the temperate deciduous. Still very, very good for agriculture. This is the chaparral. Now, notice it is very, very rugged. This is a high desert. Look at your precipitation patterns, and also look at the average temperature. Average temperature is very high, not tremendous fluctuation there, and you'll see short, scrubby vegetation, anything that can cling to a hillside and live without very much precipitation. So really a Mediterranean climate. We do have a chaparral in Southern California. So problems there. Frequent fires, mudslides, because it is dry. And so the fires, because it is dry, if there's any lightning strikes or anybody is careless with with their campfires or anything, then fires are easily run through that area. The mudslides come from the fact that the soil tends to be somewhat loose because there isn't a lot of precipitation. So it'll be loose, and then when they get any amount of rain at all, usually it comes down very, very quickly, and that causes a mudslide because everything's so loose on the ground there. Let me get out of the way so you can see the goats. So the goats actually minimize the damage by fires because they eat all the scrub brush that's underneath and keep everything cleaned out. Now these guys are perfect for this environment. If you look at their feet are cloven. I know it's hard to see on this picture, but that way as they go around the rock, it almost gives them claws to kind of hang on to those rocks. And our next one's the desert. Very high temperatures, as you can expect, and very low precipitation. The low precipitation in the desert gives you a couple of interesting characteristics of the desert. First characteristic of the desert is that at night, as soon as the sun goes down, because there's no humidity whatsoever or water vapor in the air, as soon as the sun goes down, the warmth of the desert goes away. It gets very, very cold. So you have extreme temperatures from very hot during the day to very cold at night. Also with this extreme low precipitation, not much vegetation can grow. So not a very diverse producer level, and therefore not a very diverse array of consumers either. So about all you see out here is cactus. There's a little sage growing here and there. I'll try to get out of your pictures so you can see them. I know you like to see them. I lost me. I don't know where I am. Okay, I'm back. Covering the bunny, but I'll get off the bunny in a minute. Deserts, daily temperature arid soil. The soil does not have a lot of nutrients, as you can imagine. A lot of times the soil it's either clay or it is sand. So clay will hold minerals, but with no vegetation or very little, and decomposition rate is very, very fast, you just don't have a lot of nutrients in that soil. So it's not necessarily a good soil to use for any kind of agriculture. Less than 10 inches of rain of precipitation a year, and again we talk about sparsely covered. It's because, number one, these plants have to have vast root systems in order to suck up enough water when it does rain, so there's competition under the ground that you can't see going on. And most of the plants will be short in stature. They won't be tall, primarily due to lack of rain and nutrients in the soil. Now, some of your cactuses, saguaros, are large, and they'll be fairly tall. So I want to talk about the animals here. The animals here are very interesting, getting them to be able to live in this environment. Looking at the rabbit first, look how large his ears are. These are called radiator ears, and basically the rabbit, his ears are almost see-through, and the blood vessels are very, very close to the skin, and because they're so thin. So what goes on basically with the rabbit is that the air hits his ears and actually cools the blood, and so then when the blood goes back into his body, it's cooled down so he doesn't overheat. So he also, most animals eat either in the early hours or in the late hours of the afternoon, so to keep them. And notice how he is camouflaged. It works really well for him. And this little guy, he is very adapted. He does not put out any water whatsoever. He doesn't need to drink water. He can get enough water from his food and from his metabolism. A lot of the animals will put out dry feces, but they will also not urinate. They will put out urea pellets so that they can conserve water. This is the savanna. We talk a lot about the animals of the savanna. We've talked about the lions and the zebra for different reasons, predator-prey. And so here we are, and what I want you to notice here is the winter is wet and the summer is dry with virtually no rainfall. So, characteristics of animals here. The grazers have some interesting characteristics. Because they have to be able to get through that dry season. And the savanna is mostly grass. It's got trees here and there, but most of it's grass, some short shrubs. So a grassland can tolerate having a dry period, and because grass roots will stay healthy underneath the ground, and they'll go dormant, and then when the rain comes back, then they start to grow again. So grasses are very versatile that way. You almost can't kill grass unless you root it up, and there's no nutrients. So the grazers in the savanna, because they need so much nutrients when they are nursing, the mothers, they will have their young at the end of the wet season, kind of late February, March is when they'll have all their babies, and then the grass is very, very green and lush, and it'll stay that way through about June, so that gives them 3 to 4 months of good grass while they're nursing their babies. And then they'll wean the babies, and as that grass dries out, the nutrient level of the grass diminishes, and there's not as many calories in that grass at that time. So having their breeding seasons so that they deliver young early in the spring helps them survive. Let me pull myself over here. Precipitation, 34 to 60 inches a year. So that is in keeping with just a little bit higher than a temperate deciduous forest, but in keeping with that average. But the summers there are dry and the winters are extremely wet. The temperature, as you saw, was stagnant. It's about 85 degrees all year round because these lie close to the equator. Occasional trees, and mostly we talk about these in Africa, and again, these are your large grazers. The problems that they have, that many of the Africans are raising some kind of cattle or goats, and they're actually trying to convert this to rangeland. So then there's an increased competition for these grasses and this area. So not only you hear of them killing the lions or killing the panthers, but they're also killing the grazers as well so that they can have the grassland. So there's an issue for the natural ecology of Africa. Tropical rainforest. Okay. This is the one that has up to 120 inches of rain a year, so you can see this going up to 44 centimeters, and there you see low 80s for average, and that is throughout the year. It really doesn't have any spikes or dips in temperature. The soil is nutrient poor. It tends to be a looser soil, but here's the thing, it rains so much. So the rain, the water picks up the nutrients, they bond to the nutrients. Water is polar, and so it bonds to the nutrients, and as the water runs off, it takes the nutrients with it. So one of the producer adaptations is that they have a very, very quick uptake of nutrients, and they can actually store extra nutrients. Other producers don't store extra nutrients. They take what they need when they need it, and then if it's not available, they start to die. But these have that ability. When it's available, they take it. So that's why there's so much vegetation there, as well as warm temperatures and plenty of water. But going to that nutrient poor soil, then we ask the question, why are people cutting these areas down to farm them if the nutrients are so low? Well, first they cut them, then they burn them. So as we talked about in the beginning of the chapter, forest fire, if you burn all that organic matter, it actually dumps lots of nutrients into the grass. So when it's dumping the nutrients, not into the grass, into the ground, and then for 2 or 3 years, these farmers have great fields. They have great yields, and then by the 3rd year, 4th year, the yields are dwindling down to almost nothing, and so then it's an issue because they've sucked all the nutrients out, and then it's very hard for the tropical rainforest to regenerate itself after that, because the farmers will move on and cut something else down. This is net primary productivity. Don't forget our equation. Gross minus cellular respiration equals net primary productivity. This is an area that has very high biodiversity, not only in its producers but in its consumers as well, and actually has vertical layering. And so we have an upper story, a canopy, and an understory. The upper story gets 100% of, or gets, yeah, upper story gets filtered sunlight, but still a lot of direct sunlight. The canopy gets 100% of the sunlight, and the understory gets very little sunlight. This is down below, and it's very, very shaded. So you're going to see things like ferns and plants that can live without a lot of sunlight. Has very high species richness, and this is one where we see a lot of producer productivity in, and we see a lot of specialists in this area. So, and remember that a specialist is a consumer that feeds off of only one food source. But the tropical rainforest can support this because it is so biodiverse. And, oops, sorry, that's it for part 2. We'll be doing aquatic ecosystems in class.